He's like, what if something was in the walls? We'd go to sleep. Put the drugs down and go to sleep, sir.
No,
but
he said
it's
no.
he didn't, and that's how he died. Really sad. Hi, I'm Camille.
And I am Verna, the devil lady.
And we're the Ghouls Next Door.
Talking about spooky things.
Yeah. Talking about spooky stuff. Like the rich.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
How many people they murder? So that it literally is rain falling from the sky, just people.
Yeah. They murder so many people all the time and get
no consequences.
No consequences.
Literally none. I'll talk about that. Literally none. They had to pay money. Everything has a price, as the show says. They just give money and they get to never go to jail. And just go live their lives.
Mm-hmm. While other people didn't get to do that.
Yep.
So
it hurts.
Yeah. We are closing out our Flanagan series with his recent series, The Fall of the House of Usher, which sees a lot of returning actors. It is, falling back to the fanboy mode that he's in this time, giving Poe the treatment that he gave, like Jackson. And Taylor? I forget. I always forget. Screw. It's the same treatment, but for Poe, and I'd say even more, because with this, it's his like almost the entirety of his works, or not entirety, but like a good robust number of Poe works, and then also just like the themes and just general vibe that Poe gave. We covered Edgar Allan Poe in the way back machine. There's a Ghouls for that. When we first did horror writers, we did him, and we did Lovecraft. Remember that?
Yeah, I wonder how good those episodes are.
Well, they taught you. The episodes are dedicated to teaching you about Edgar Allan Poe and his life and his works, and so I recommend checking it out. It's old. It's way before we did video content. It was like one of the first years that we were doing Ghouls. You can find them on YouTube under our audio only playlist. So there's quite a few of our episodes pre-video that are available there, or you can just search it anywhere you find your podcasts. But let us know if you do check it out, if it does stand up to the works that we do now. Our writer series has changed significantly since then. But I think something that we talked about with all of those was that you can't deny the impact that they had on the horror genre and just where we are today. And this is just like a very overt praise to the work of Poe. Not to say that like he as a person is worthy of praise. Cool.
Time.
Yeah. He was lifing, not kind of a jerk, but they all were, right? But his work persevered. We did Mary Shelley during that, which you want to talk about the start of science fiction and horror. It's her wearing her husband's calcified heart around her neck as a necklace. That's metal as hell. This just makes me really want to do Penny Dreadful. Yeah. One day we'll cover Penny Dreadful, because again, like the same like thrill I got when watching The Fall of the House of Usher and seeing references or hearing about references to other media or like references to Poe got me like super excited. I would feel like thrilled. And then there was things that I didn't know, stories I hadn't read. So I would look them up and be like, what? Like, I didn't know that. That's so cool. I love learning. So
learning is dope. It's also depressing, but that's what it's supposed to be.
It could be depressing. It could be inspiring. It could be all kinds of things.
Both,
motivating. Yeah. So, depending on time, we will try to do a wrap up of this episode with our final rankings of the shows that we watched. Because again, we didn't do the Midnight Club, but we'll let you know how we feel. I don't know how I feel yet, so we'll see how it is. But yeah, we're going to talk about the fall of the House of Usher. Highly recommend it as a watch. I honestly recommend all his works. I definitely need to check out Midnight Club too, because clearly he is talented, and I really appreciate the narratives that he delivers. And the way that he brings like larger than life issues to the front, and in an artistic and gruesome way. Yeah.
I remember I saw part of Midnight Club and it was good. I didn't end up finishing it, but not because it wasn't good. It was just because time.
Yeah. Which we don't have, and I talk about in my section. So let me tell you about the fall of the House of Usher. So the fall of the House of Usher is from 2023, it was last year, and it's about siblings Roderick and Madeline Usher have built a pharmaceutical company into an empire of wealth, privilege, and power. However, secrets come to light when the heirs to the Usher dynasty start dying. And it's created by Mike Flanagan. So The Fall of the House of Usher is a gory, vicious story. I would say this is the most gory, gruesome of all the series. He was putting in blood. He was holding back some punches. He always has, blood and things. But this one was really delivering on the horror. So if you don't like gore, I get it. If the other ones are more cerebral for you, I could see how someone might not like this one, because it is gory and it is a true Shakespearean tragedy. But it does see the end of a villainous family line, the Ushers. So it's told as a story akin to a deathbed confession, much like the Poe story that inspired it. Which is The Fall of the House of Usher, by Roderick Usher, who is aged now, as is his once grand mansion, now cloaked in shadows and secrets. And in his story, he shares the chaotic, aggressive downfall of his family and what led to their demise. And through the series, we meet the many Ushers and those who serve them, operating as satellites revolving around the magnetic hold of the affluent Ushers. Each of Roderick's children, now grown and established Nepo babies, meet an untimely, gruesome end. And you're like, why? Honestly, I'm thinking, what does the media really say? How do you explain that? That's so crazy. And I think it would just really, dismantle a lot of things. It would just, shift things, because people would be like, something is
how all these people die. But it's also, the inverse of that is, how do all these people die at the hands of these companies and these people, and no one talks about them? So yeah.
And so for theirs to be so public is kind of a thing. It's like a horror story of Succession. People love that show. I just can't get with rich people doing awful things and not being brutally murdered. To me, I'm just I can't. I get it. I get totally, people are allowed to love it. It's just not for me. I'm just ew. Ew.
And also, for rich people don't get consequences in the real world, so we need media that gives consequences in this fake world. Otherwise, it's just this is too much reality, and it feels gross.
Yeah, it's total catharsis for this.
And maybe the consequences aren't their entire family dying, but it should be jail or something else. You know what I mean?
They can't do this anymore.
Something that stops them.
At the very least, stop.
Yeah.
So against the backdrop of a decaying mansion, the series weaves a complex tapestry of psychological intrigue, gothic horror, and supernatural suspense. And as Roderick delves deeper into the secrets of his family's past, he uncovers a series of shocking revelations that threaten to consume him entirely. But as the House of Usher teeters on the brink of collapse, Roderick must confront the demons that haunt him and uncover the truth before it's too late. It's too late. And with its haunting atmosphere, richly drawn characters, and spine-tingling plot twists, Flanagan offers us another nail-biting series that explores the impact of insatiable greed by those in power on the world around them. And it offers us a gruesome justice, a bloody knife of consequence that the villains of the real world will never face. And it's cathartic and emotional, and it left me badly wishing that Verna was real. In the end, I was like, oh, how do we manifest this being here? I felt like, honestly, I felt a little sad. I was like, why don't we have her?
Well, the question is, it's like, do we though? Because honestly, Roger didn't get consequences till he was old as heck. Yeah. And like his kids had the consequences, but they were kids at one point. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. So they participated, but they were not the start. And it's like he got to live a long life filled with gross, but like in his mind, he was happy for part of it.
Yeah, he was doing something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I just like, I guess, yeah, some Verners are real. You know, there was there was a Verna in France. So off of their hands. So they do exist out there. It's just we haven't seen them in a long time. Well, here on our soil, we see it all over the place. But tear up the planks. It is the beating of his hideous heart. I'm going to quote a little bit of Poe throughout my section because it's good. But like I said, Flanagan is back at it again with his fanboy fun, this time unpacking the legacy of Edgar Allan Poe. And I enjoyed the references to Poe's work in the show, though knowing the work, like the pieces that it was referencing, whether name of the character or name of the episode, definitely spoiled the fate of whatever Usher it was. Like I'd see the title, like, oh, okay, I know what's gonna happen. Yeah. Like, is there a monkey involved? All right, I know where this is going. And it's what had me truly hooked. I would get very giddy to see who's the next one and to hear the names and just like also like in looking up, like it forced me to look up things because I was like, what? I know I'm missing more. And so there's just some even just throwaway lines where I was like, oh my God, that's so exciting. And then I want to read that now. So yeah, makes readers of us all. But that's not all that the show has to offer. In true Flanagan fashion, he offers us a strong critique of the pharmaceutical industry and the rich elite that murders many for wealth. And that is a heavy topic and one that I feel he handled well in all its weight. It's still like a horror show and it's very entertaining. But again, he's got those lines. They deliver and like a punch to the gut, leaving us gasping for breath and begging for justice that will never come, or maybe it can. But before I dive into those sad, beautiful, and honestly terrifying moments, I did want to geek out a little bit and share some of the Poe references found in the show, because the show overall does an amazing job of representing the work of Poe, who often criticized the wealthy upper-class villains of society. Like a lot of these stories that he's referencing, like you're like, okay, he's not far off. Like, he didn't have to work hard, is what I'm trying to say. He didn't really have to work hard to make this story exist. If Poe's works are to be believed that they exist in the same worlds, right? Like if he has his own Poe verse, this is what it would kind of look like. I could see it tying back even just to the Ushers in this way. But he also spoke of grief, loss, and the fragility of the human minds, just how any little thing can kind of shake you to your core and disrupt just like your processing of like the world around you. And again, Flanagan truly understands his source material, and the show felt true to the Gothic, gory, and heartbreaking tone that Poe delivered in all of his works. So let's dive into those references, and then I'm going to close out with some impactful quotes, and then Kat's going to close out with a lot of sad.
Yeah, so I'm sorry. Yeah, my section's sad.
Yeah. And just like a full, like the show is sad. Like it has some fun to it because of the gore and because you're like questioning and you're like, what's going on? But you do get really emotionally attached to these characters, even when like some of them are truly villains. Some of them are just like, life happened. This is the circumstances that they're in. They didn't stand a chance. But like, it does get really sad because that's what he does. He knows how to like wallow and make you feel real world issues. Usually they're a little bit more intimate, where this is a like a grander scale of like grief and loss that he is targeting in essentially attacking the upper class and the 1%. So before we get into the sad of what it is and why we're upset about the world, let's geek out about literature, horror literature. So firstly, the show is named for a short story by Poe by the same name, which follows an unnamed narrator who is called upon by a childhood friend, the affluent Roderick Usher, and his ailing sister Madeline. And in the story, Roderick is sharing his life and how he arrived here in a dilapidated version of his life, now full of regret. And in the show, Roderick spins a similar tale, though far more gruesome, and this time to an old acquaintance turned enemy. See Augustine Dupin. And Dupin is a character in Poe's stories that actually predates Sherlock Holmes, but feature the same fashion of detective skills where he relied on inductive reasoning to solve the crimes presented to him. So he did it before Sherlock did, which is like, everyone knows Sherlock. Everyone knows like he looks at the world and he infers the whole situation from that. That's what Dupin was doing. And he comes up again in the story as a reference in one of the stories that occurs. But that, like, I didn't know that. And so I actually looked that up and was like, that's so cool. Yeah. So each of the Ushers is named for a character in Poe's work, including even Roderick's first wife, poor Annabelle Lee, which is Poe's wife and cousin, who died. His young cousin. He shouldn't have married him. Different times. I don't know. In their names or the title of their episode, you can infer the fates of the Ushers. So first we have Prospero, who goes by Perry. He's the youngest of the Ushers, who fancies himself like this club creator. He envisions this like experience for his attendees, and it was drugs and sex and all the other devious activities that people like to do at night. I think like it sounds like a good idea. I feel like people would have loved that club. It's just like their processes and procedures, and he's too young to like understand the importance of safety.
Of those processes and procedures,
And also, like, he doesn't care. He's gonna get money. He's spoiled. He's a rich little baby. So the episode that sees his demise is The Mask of the Red Death. The same story his name comes from, which is about Prince Prospero and the rich who are partying it up during a literal plague before the Mask of Red Death joins the party and quickly kills them by way of the plague in the since they're isolated. Which feels a little eerily similar to when we just were in the middle of our own plague. And the rich were partying it up. Yeah. They be doing that. Episode 3, Murder in the Rue Morgue, finds Camille dead at the hands of a monkey. And this story is much the same, focused around Detective Dupin, like Murder in the Rue Morgue is, where he solves the mystery of a locked room and 2 viciously murdered women. Spoilers, a chimpanzee did it. And that's what he figures out. Yeah. His deductive reasoning. It's actually a really wild story. I highly recommend you giving it a read. I also learned some really scary things about chimpanzees just in life. Like, they're really scary. They're like sinister. I don't know. But
very capable of murder, Wasn't that in the other movie? Wasn't that in Nope?
Was he a chimpanzee?
I thought so.
do experiments.
Isn't that just like people?
Yeah, exactly. Scary. Which is like, yeah. But that's what, so if you know what happens in the Rue Morgue, you know what happens to poor Camille. And if you're watching, that's what happened to me. The Black Cat features Raoul Coley, who is Leo, Napoleon, Usher, who is driven mad by the appearance of his partner's cat, leading to his death. A similar thing happens in the story, and I feel like most people have read this one. It's similar. He's got a thread of like, he loves putting stuff in stuff. So it features one of Poe's favorite tortures of someone or something in the walls or the floorboards. Like people or things are just in stuff. Like it's like Black Cat, Telltale Heart. There's like the Cask of Amontillado. All of them. He's like, what if something was in the walls? Like, Poe, go to sleep. Put the drugs down and go to sleep, sir. But it's. No. He didn't, and that's how he died. Really sad. But the Black Cat, it's pretty much that. It honestly, I think the story with in this show is way more captivating to me. But it's similar. It's like in the Black Cat, he's like an animal abuser. He's awful. Takes a cat's eye out. It's gross.
And in this, that's not. He was literally.
He wasn't trying to do that.
Yeah.
He was just driven mad. Which I was like, okay, I feel more strongly about this person than that jerk. Which is the same for like The Telltale Heart, which is arguably the most well-known of Poe's work. So I'm sure you knew what was coming in this episode. But it is also one of the most heartbreaking episodes. And again, Tania Miller just plays tragedy so well. Yeah. She walks on screen and I'm immediately like, I'm sold. Whatever it is, team her. And she was bad. She did awful things, and girl, why you do this to me? This time she is Victorine, who is a scientist who murders her love in a fit of insanity, and her episode mirrors both Telltale Heart and the story of her namesake, which is called The Premature Burial, which I haven't read, but I did find a helpful article on Screwy Rant titled The Real Meaning Behind Every Usher Child's Name to explain in the Poe story, The Premature Burial, Victorine is accidentally buried alive by her lover, causing the narrator to also fear being buried alive. So it's like this. We're killing each other. Goldbug is about a man who becomes enthralled by a gold bug. It kind of reads like oh my god, I'm totally blanking on it. It's like right there. Heart of Darkness. Joseph Conrad. Okay. And some Lovecraft, where it's like people going places they shouldn't be going, touching things they shouldn't be touching.
Yeah.
Just a trend of white men in literature and life. So that's kind of what that story is. And Tamberlane uses Goldbug as like the icon for her company. And her name is from a poem called Tamerlane, about a ruler who sacrifices love for power, which we see Tamerlane do without hesitation to poor Bilt. He's also a reference to a story, but I didn't read it. I was like, oh, gotta go to the important people. But also I didn't realize, because he looks so different. The guy who played her husband is also in Midnight Mass. He's the guy with like the beard. I'll send you pictures. I forget his name right now.
Oh wait, okay, I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
I was like, too, what? He looks so different.
That's the effect of beards, ultimately.
And the effect of Flanagan. Like, he transforms characters, all like people into new characters. I will say the guy who plays Frederick Usher, he always be somebody's dad. He'd just be playing dad. So Frederick Usher, who was the oldest and quite despicable child of Roderick, is named for Poe's first printed story called Metzengerstein. I don't speak German. Metzengerstein, a tale in an imitation of the German, which I also haven't read. But here's what Screen Rant had to say. In Metzengerstein, Frederick exhibits cruel behavior due to his immense power at a young age, and in the end, he dies in a fire after entering a burning castle, which is pretty similar to how Frederick dies in The Fall of the House of Usher, the show, in the demolition of a building. However, Frederick's name is also inspired by Poe's story, The Pit and the Pendulum, of which the episode is named, and also has a similar fate. Lastly, Lenore, the granddaughter of Roderick, who is so much unlike the rest of her family, with some humanity and care still in her, like not having been robbed of those features yet. She too meets a tragic end that leaves viewers much more heartbroken than the others, who seemed at least a little bit deserving, if not more.
Yeah.
So Lenore is named for the lost love whose death plagues the narrator in The Raven, which is, that's her episode. So that, like, The Raven is just about how grief is there. It's just always hovering around you, and it isolates you from the world around you too. And it's a thief, and it's tragic, and it's sad, and all of those other emotions that come with it. And so Lenore in that is this, love gone too soon and, robbed of us. And that's precisely what she is in this. So perfectly named. Just a few other nods that I found interesting include, this time, thank you to Entertainment, has an article called Explaining the Edgar Allan Poe References in the Fall of the House of Usher. There's a lot out there. You can find something. They say Igby Rigney, the Midnight Club, he's from the Midnight Club, plays Toby, one of Camille's two assistants. And in a particular scene in episode 2, his boss exclaims, "Toby, damn it!" upon learning he hasn't discovered who the supposed leak in the family is. And this is a reference to the lead character of 1841's Never Bet the Devil Your Head, which centers on Toby Dammit, a man who loses his head after seemingly making a bet with the devil. But a bit on the nose there, Poe, but a bit on the nose for the show. Making deals with devils, people be doing that. We can't all beat them in a fiddle competition. So Mark Hamill's author Pym, whose name and fantastical story hints at the true identity of Verna as being this ominous, unspeakable evil or like otherworldly being. In the narrative of Arthur Gurdon Pym of Nantucket, Arthur Pym sails the sea on a whaling vessel, abruptly ending at the South Pole. And then journey includes horrible things like cannibalism and otherworldly monsters, including Verna, who tells him that she waved to him from the shoreline when he found himself on the spooky lands of the unknown. And then Arthur Pym also makes like a joke about eating someone.
And Roderick also is like, I wonder what he did down there. Like, we could have eaten somebody. I always imagine it was something like kind of like crazy, like eating somebody or something like that. Yeah,
that's what it is. That's what it was. Yeah, they alluded like that journey changed him irreparably, and it's why he has like Verna's like, I tempted you once before, you said no, and I'll tempt you again. And he's like, no thanks. And she's like, cool. That's all I can do. I could ask. And then one of the most recognizable references would be when Roderick and Madeline brick up their boss in the walls, which is a clear reference to the Cask of Amontillado. He's even dressed as a clown, which is what happens in the story, because it was like a Halloween costume. It was like a costume party of some sort, but he's dressed as a clown. Or jester. And that's in the Cask of Amontillado. He's in a jester costume. When he what I forget his name. It's a fun one. But you definitely read that in high school, I'm sure. So that's not all the references that there are in the show, but it's all the ones I have time for today. So go read some classic horror. And then you could rewatch the show and be like, whoa, what? That's fun.
I'll have to do that because I haven't read any of them really, other than like the Telltale Heart. I remember they also did like Simpsons references to some of Poe's work, and I remember watching those. So that's about all I needed, I guess. I don't know. But you're right. I should go back and read them so I can watch the show and actually like appreciate the references. I remember the Black Cat too. I also remember that one
because it's it's like the same thing. Like he's like, put them in the walls. Because the cat's in the walls, the person's under the floorboards, the guy's bricked up in the tunnels. Like, we just putting people in the walls and in the house. I get it. Like, your decisions haunt you, Poe. I get it.
Yeah. Consequences hide. In the walls of your home.
In plain sight, You're driven mad by your actions, if only. But death has reared himself a throne. So, while watching, Kat actually mentioned, they said to me, do all rich people sell their souls to the devil? And in my opinion, they do. Their souls being their capacity for human decency, compassion, and emotional intelligence. And that exchange, they're giving that capacity up for the wealth that they get in return. And it's not a devil, so we don't get the comeuppance that we are owed for the people who are making those exchanges. But
there are no ethical billionaires.
Yes, as we've discussed many times on the show, how it is impossible to be both a billionaire and a good person. Obviously, there's the villainous choices that you make to obtain that wealth, which is corrupting. Like you have to do horrible things to obtain that much wealth. You cannot do it in any way that is a good person, right? But we've also discussed in length how having excess wealth alters your brain chemistry. Like it literally changes the way that you see the world and understand other people, and your capacity for empathy and just that, honestly, at the core. And so I do highly recommend checking out our American Psycho episode for more on that. Kat did a really
fundamentally changes the brain.
Yeah, it's such a great episode on that. Like I learned a lot, and something that's really helped me even just understand some of the tragedies of the world, and kind of back that up when I'm trying to explain to people, like, these are literal evil villains. I don't know how else to explain. Like, they're villains. Period. So while Verna is not real and unable to exact revenge upon the ruling class, that's our job. Verna is real in a more tragic sense, right? That these people, very few people, mind you, we outnumber them, have made a rather one-sided deal, the consequences of which most likely they won't suffer in their lifetimes, but instead will ripple out, affecting the rest of the world in irreparable ways. So Verna's not here. So we have to be Verna. So Verna, in an impactful and harrowing scene, asks Roderick to look out the window as bodies rain from the sky and begin piling up. And he's in a skyscraper. Okay, like he is at the top. He's rich. He's at the top, and they're just falling. And it's like the thump and the it's so jarring. I was not expecting it, and it's like such an obvious metaphor for the pharmaceutical industry and its effects, because the whole story is that Roderick and Madeline are a pharmaceutical company that they've created, Ligadone, that has hurt people in much the same way that they have done in our world. So this is just like to see it in one place when it's something like an issue that is often like minimized or ignored or vilified. It's so easy to be like, oh, they're addicts, so they don't matter, without like looking at the cause and saying like, how did that happen? How did they get to this place? And most often, a lot of like the newer people who are struggling in like the most like decades of time have been, they've had some type of accident and, needed medication to aid them while they're healing, and it's addictive. And then when the doctors cut them off, now they have to go and find that somewhere else. And so then it leaves...
The doctors are the actual drug dealers.
Yes,
which
or they just keep doing
it. Yeah. And the vilifying of addicted people is actually something that the insurance companies paid for. We feel that way, not because that's what we should feel, but because they spent a lot of money to make ads and campaigns to influence the public to think that. Just like they did for welfare.
Yeah. So. Well, I'd say if anyone hasn't watched Thank You for Smoking, I think that's such a great example of the way that is twisted, and how easy you can like manipulate public opinion for the greater interest of these wealthy elites.
Or at least it was before the internet as much.
Yeah.
Which is why they're so mad at it.
That's why they're trying to shut down TikTok. Anyway, so that's why we exist. We are not mass media. We do not have anybody giving us money, unfortunately. We need money too, but it does mean we have the freedom to say whatever we want, which is
ideally we would be people funded instead of corporation funded. If we ever do receive funding for anything.
Yeah, that being said, if you support the Ghouls, check out our coffee account. Support us, help us out, help us keep making content like this. So that really impactful. Like it like shook me. I really wasn't expecting all the bodies, and it like. Because it's like, you can say that, right? You can say like, you've murdered all these people by denying people access to an easily obtainable, cheap medication that could save their lives, by denying, like, nobody should die because they can't afford medication. And the fact that people are doing that and people are being addicted and being lost too soon, because they're like led like lambs to the slaughter to this addiction. Right. But to see it in this way, like, it is so obvious, right? It's such an obvious metaphor. She's like, here's the dead, like, here's the piles, the massive, just like, they're just piling up. But even still, with it being so obvious, I think we don't really get that all the time in media. People just aren't calling it for what it is all the time, and even as overtly as that. And so I really appreciated that. And even further, she says, these are your bodies. Right. And she says, though she's worked with so many villains, so many rich people, just like Roderick, but real ones, that have, been integral to where we are, like putting us where we are now and to ending the lives that they have. Roderick has made a profound impact. And she says, I've worked with a lot of truly influential people over the years, but when it comes to sheer body count, you're in my top 5. And this impact, Roderick is terribly aware of. He admits to Dupin in his confession that he was aware of the pyramid of bodies he'd be building on top of to reach that level of power. Like, that's what he says, pyramid of bodies. Because that's what we're saying. When we're saying you can't be, there's no ethical billionaires, there's no good person that could be a billionaire, because you do have to build on a pyramid of bodies, whether they're alive or dead, right? Like, you are profiting off of the suffering of other people, because you have to. It's the only way you can get. And you have to turn off that part of your brain and soul that cares to be able to do that.
Yeah.
You just can't be both. So some other moments that stuck with me and felt like the thesis of the film include a monologue from Verna where she says, so much money. One of my favorite things about human beings, starvation, poverty, disease, you could fix all that just with money. And you don't. I mean, if you took just a little bit of time off the vanity voyages, pleasure cruising, billionaire space race, hell, you stopped making movies and TV for 1 year, and you spent that money on what you really need, you could solve it all with some to spare, which is a really big ouch and completely true. Because homelessness, starvation, poverty, disease, those things that she mentions are not unavoidable. They aren't impossible issues to address. We have the resources, technology, and ability to alleviate and solve each of these issues, not only in our own country, but worldwide. The only thing stopping us are those in power who are hoarding the wealth like a monstrous dragon upon a horde, suffocating everyone else around them. Like, we have, like, there's, we have it. We can. I just watched this whole thing about how the Supreme Court tomorrow, which we're filming this on a Sunday, tomorrow, Monday, is having this whole discussion about essentially criminalizing homelessness and like putting unhoused people in prison for unpaid labor because they can't have a place to stay.
Yeah. Instead, and I believe there are already places that have passed it.
Yeah. Instead of using the like the multitudes of vacant properties and skyrises that we can't even afford, we could use those to house our community and the people who live here. Like, what? Yeah. But no, they're the problem. Got to put them away. Don't want anyone seeing them. So
it's because they love slavery so much. Yeah. And they're still so mad about it.
We got to keep finding ways to put it
Make
back.
Slavery. Yeah.
Do it again, but different. Put a different mask on it. Which again, like, it's moments like these that bring us back to that appreciation for Flanagan, where he does, like, he'll have such like a very honest horror story, and then he'll hit you with just like, he's like, let me rant for a second. Yeah. He's like, all right, pause on the gore for just a second. Let me tell you about this. Okay. Have you ever thought about this? And then you're like, yeah, I have, Flanagan. And I'm so glad that you're making other people think about it too. Yeah. And I just really do I do feel like he's giving us pieces of himself in the things that he spirals out about. So there's also a monologue. I'm almost done. 2 monologues. You're good. But there's a monologue at the end of the show by Madeline as she fights against her fate in analysis of her character that I think it's misrepresented. I think it's easy for people to be like, she's right. Like, sometimes people don't realize that it's like villains are allowed to be bad, and that the things that they say are bad. Like, you're supposed to interpret them as bad. It's not like, it's like, characters could be bad in fiction. Like, that's how they grow. Or anyway, she says, so explicit content here. She says, we turn men into cum fountains and women into factories, cranking out what? An impoverished workforce there for the labor and to spend what little they make consuming. And what do we teach them to want? Houses they can't afford, cars that poison the air, single-serve plastics, clothes made by starving children in third world countries, and they want it so bad that they're begging for it. They're screaming for it. They're insisting upon it. And where's the problem? These fucking monsters, these fucking consumers, these fucking mouths. They point at you and make like we're the problem. They fucking invented us. They begged us, and they're begging for us still. She's such a cunt. I can't. She's like so evil. Like, Roderick is definitely sinister, and the fact that he makes this deal when he has 2 children that are alive, crazy. She does not give a shit about people.
Yeah.
And she never tries to. So to the end, like, at least he's remorseful. She's never that. So on the surface, this can be interpreted as a critique on rampant consumerism and this fast consumerism that we subscribe to as a culture, demanding more and faster. But remember that Madeline is the villain here. So she is the rich 1% that has created the very system she's blaming people for falling victim to. This is her way of justifying her deeds and to excuse her behavior, but it in no way accomplishes that because of wealth inequality, and inequality that Madeline has contributed to and created a chasm for, has conditioned us to seek joy in products that offer short moments of bliss, because that's all we're afforded when so much of our time is dedicated to working to survive. We get a few minutes. Okay, I want to buy a big screen TV because I can't go anywhere. So I'm going to escape through this screen. Like, regular people are forced to live in the now, unable to plan or work towards a future, right? There's a whole conversations about like the inability to build up a savings account or even to have a Costco membership, right? Or to think about buying things in bulk. They can't. So they end up spending more on less because that's what they can afford now. And it ends up costing more over time. They can't even be strategic about that because we got paycheck to paycheck, right? So yes, we want more. We want it fast and cheap because of all the currencies that we are lacking. The most crucial is time. Right? We are exhausted from laboring with the hoard of wealth that we can never reach on our shoulders and the hours of our lives slipping through our hands. We are deserving of those little joys, but we're also deserving of the time and opportunity to invest in ourselves and to eventually aspire for more efficient, safe, and healthy choices. Hell, to have a choice at all. Because that's it. That's a big thing about what she is saying, is there's an illusion of choice. right? She's saying they're asking us for this instead of saying this is all we've given them.
Yeah.
This is all they can have. So we want
there's
more.
There's literally no other choice.
Yeah, we want more because what else do we have? Like, it's insane to me. Like, so many people are like, oh, we're all like, there's no, like, you know, you can't exist in capitalism and, you know, be a good person, all this other stuff. It's like, this is where we live.
Yeah, right? And like literally there's like also like studies done about like the human mind and like how when you're not given the possibility, like the idea that there's a possibility of something else, and you don't have the time to imagine, you literally have not the resources or time to even sit and think or process for a second. You can't even imagine something else because you're so busy just trying to survive. So
yeah, and when you even think about like what options there are, like if we're voting against like fast fashion, obviously, which is very harmful for the environment and for the people who are being abused to get that, right? The alternative are clothing that we can afford, and the reason we can't afford it is because of the employment, like because we haven't raised minimum wage, and because people have like 3 jobs just to pay the bills. So it's like you're giving the illusion of choice, and that you're putting the onus on the population to be like, well, you're choosing McDonald's when you could have bought fresh vegetables. And it's like, where are the fresh vegetables? We live in a food desert, right? Like. Yeah, and it's just toxic. It composites all over itself.
Or the vegetables are covered in chemicals, which isn't actually.
Illusion of choice. It all. No matter what you do, you're fucked. So, lastly, we go over to Kat, just because Kat's going to talk a lot about like the pharmaceutical industry, and I just really wanted to rant on the rich too, because that's such a big and also 100%. Just like the other industries that are contributing to this wealth inequality that is being talked about in this show. So lastly, I'll discuss Roderick's famous lemon speech. It's very long, so bear with me, in which he shares, "When life hands you lemons, make lemonade? No. First, you roll out a multimedia campaign to convince people lemons are incredibly scarce, which only works if you stockpile lemons and control the supply. Then a media blitz. Lemon is the only way to say I love you. The must-have accessory for engagements or anniversaries. Roses are out, lemons are in. Limited edition lemon bracelets, yellow diamonds called lemon drops. You get Apple to call their new operating system OS Lemon, a little accent over the O. You charge 40% more for organic lemons, 50% more for conflict-free lemons. You pack the Capitol with lemon lobbyists. You get a Kardashian to suck a lemon wedge in a leaked sex tape. Timothy Chalamet wears lemon shoes at con. Get a hashtag campaign. Something isn't cool or tight or awesome. No, it's lemon. Did you see that movie? Did you see that concert? It was effing lemon. Billie Eilish, OMG, hashtag lemon. You get Dr. Oz to recommend 4 lemons a day and a lemon suppository supplement to get rid of toxins, because there's nothing scarier than toxins. Then you patent the seeds. You write a line of genetic code that makes the lemons look just a little more like tits. And you get a gene patent for the tit lemon DNA sequence. You cross-pollinate. You get those seeds circulating in the wild. And then you sue the farmer for copyright infringement when the genetic code shows up on their land. Sit back, rake in the millions, and then when you're done and you've sold them your lempire for a few $1 billion, then and only then you make some fucking lemonade. It's a heavy one. Yeah. And I think it's pretty obvious what's being communicated here. But given the current situation, specifically what I was thinking of, especially when they said conflict-free lemons, is the Democratic Republic of Congo, where conflict minerals like tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold, all necessary minerals in the creation of our beloved technology, are being mined, and in really harmful ways and chaotic and just like entire nation destabilizing ways. And so in an article on CNBC titled How Conflict Minerals Make It Into Our Phones, they explain the need for these minerals and why we should be concerned about the origin of our devices' materials, saying the materials are integral to consumer electronics. In a smartphone, for example, tin is used to solder metal components together, while tantalum is used in capacitors, which store electrical energy. Tungsten is used in the components that make a phone vibrate, and gold is used in circuit board connectors. In the past decade, African countries, intergovernmental organizations, and companies have ramped up their efforts to clean up mineral supply chains, but consumers still can't be sure if the minerals in their electronics are fully conflict-free, or if the mines where they originated are dangerous, environmentally destructive, or use child labor. We don't know, right? Yeah. Because we're sold the finished package, which is your iPhone, not how we got here and the impact that it has on these people that are so far away, right?
Yeah.
This is only one example of the very many that plague our world like a mask of red death, looming on the outside as a warning while we party away on the inside, isolated from the consequences of even our own actions as consumers, right?
Yeah.
Which is why it is our duty to speak out against these atrocities, to be aware of our needs impact on the world, and most importantly, to hold the people responsible, right? We can't hold our breath for the appearance of a vengeful Verna to exact the terms of their villainous deals with the devil. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, right? So we need to fight for our Congolese brothers and sisters, for our Palestine brothers and sisters, and our neighbors around us, housed and unhoused. What you should take away from this show is that we do have the power. We just need to remember that we are the many and that we have a voice. Be the Verna that you want to see in the world. And I'm not advocating murder. I'm just saying direct action gets the goods. So, there are things you can do in lieu of murder to get things done, right? I'm just saying, be as angry and as vengeful as Verna, minus murdering people in gruesome, horrible ways.
Yeah, and so there's so much to say about the psychology of people when they're handed power. Mm-hmm. And even in looking at the Usher kids too, you see kids who didn't know they were part of the Ushers till they were in their 20s, some of them, and then they were just thrown all this money, and it corrupted them. So it's when we're dismantling these systems, there has to be protections from one person being you know what, they got to do it. So, we were oppressed before. Why don't I do that now? Mm-hmm. And it's thinking about what's happening in the world right now, because that's their whole argument and is not real. The whole thing.
Yeah, it's my turn. We don't want it to be anybody's turn. We're done with the turns.
The turns are done.
That's it. I don't want us to hold them responsible and then put somebody else there. No one has the right to do genocide. I want that to be clear, just because genocide happened to you. That's not how that works. So
yes, ultimately,
my 2 cents.
Same 2 cents. We're sharing them. That's all we have. Them. So ultimately, I planned to talk about both the opioid crisis and how they are the Usher family. It's the Sackler family. Sackler family, they're the same people, ultimately. And that they're not the only ones, but I plan to talk about that, and also the ways that the rich make it so that you can't buy life-saving medications. So I'll just do a really brief overview of that. We've seen what's happened with insulin. We have articles in our blog that you can read about that are just really upsetting. And there's cancer fighting medications that are behind absurd paywalls. It's you live for what at that point, with the amount of money that they charge you to afford these medications, and many people die because they literally cannot. And additional inhalers, considering how polluted our world is becoming, how much asthma is directly impacted by pollution. My inhaler costs $125 per inhaler that I'm supposed to take every month. And that's just for one of them. I have 2. One's an emergency that will save my life if I literally stop breathing. And one is a control inhaler and it's I'm lucky enough that some months I can afford that. But there are humans that cannot, absolutely. And life-saving medication specifically, it should be a crime in the way that there is some sort of punishment and responsibility taken for the companies that charge this absurd amount of money for medication, as well as just like access to life-saving care. Our entire system is messed up. So it's like there's no one thing that's happening. It's a big concoction of things.
Yeah.
That make all of this possible.
Just compounds, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, that's one thing where it's like, the solution maybe isn't murder, obviously, because it's not just one person doing it.
Yeah.
There are so many individual people making choices that result in this. It's a smaller percentage than us, like at the bottom. But it is still many, many humans self-serving and thinking of themselves, making these choices where they could stand up. Like, what is her name? Oh my goodness. I know her. She's my favorite character in the show. Lenore?
Lenore?
Yeah. Who should
I thought you were talking about real people. Because I was going to be Bezos' wife just doubled down her donations. It's like, yeah. That's someone who's great.
And that's like kind of an allegory for the wife in the House of Usher. That's Lenore's mother. So we see like there's people who do stand up and they do things that need to happen and use the money for good. But they're so few and far between. And that there's so many people who make choices with the hopes that they'll get to be the next Ushers, or that they can create that kind of wealth for their family and do so at the cost of literally every single person that they could possibly care about. So that's a problem. So as Gabe was talking about, the world of the House of Usher already exists. We live in it. The awful things, every single one of them, other than the fantastical horror things like bodies actually literally raining from the sky, these things happen every single day. We witness them play out on screen. They reflect what is actually happening in reality. So everyone has heard of someone or personally knows someone who's been addicted to a substance, whether that's pills, whether that's drugs in general, whether that's alcohol, whether that's cigarettes. Like there's so many harmful substances that can be purchased in our country and are actively pushed to be purchased in our country that everyone knows somebody who has been impacted by those things. But today we're specifically going to be talking about pills because that's like the big thing in the Ushers. They are specifically marketing a pill called Ligodone that very much mimics Oxycontin or oxycodone. So essentially, the reason for this is, it's very complicated, but I watched all of the John Oliver Last Week Tonight episodes, which Gabe shared with me on opioids, and I read a few articles, but he kind of goes really into depth about the opioid crisis that has pushed across the country and how that has like expanded and grown into the fentanyl crisis. And like, you know, it started with Oxy, it grew into all these other drugs. And ultimately, it started with everything that happened in like the 50s with the FBI and it started there, but it grew into this. So essentially, we're specifically pointing out companies like Purdue, who have a family that runs it that very much mimics the Ushers. There's actually a few people in that family that I can like directly compare to characters in the show. And essentially this company, Purdue, in 1996 released a drug called Oxycontin or oxycodone with an aggressive, and if this was a dystopian novel, comical marketing campaign to push this drug heavily to doctors. This included fun hats, swing music CDs, and cute plushies wearing Oxycontin t-shirts.
That's crazy.
Yes. And then like they would be giving them out to doctors like, hey, have you heard of this? Take my drug. Blah, blah, blah. And literally, so the president of this company would like force his way into, I'll get into that later, but like he forces his way into like drug rep sales. Like he would go with them to sell the drugs to the doctors. And they had like wrote an email. They're like, can you please make him stop? We want him not to be with us. He's messing it up.
Yeah.
This rich man. But okay. Additionally, and probably the most impactful were the testimony of videos from patients speaking on how the drug changed their lives. And the first interview speaking about their basically response to starting Oxycontin as a drug. The woman in the video says she has not missed a day of work, which capitalism loves since starting the medication. And then also included more meaningful impacts like being able to keep up with her grandkids. We find out years later, it's like a tragedy that that same woman became addicted to the medication and almost lost everything. I believe they did like that one where they do the interview and it's like an hour, 60 minutes.
60 minutes. Where are they now?
Yeah, exactly. So the videos were intentionally used to alleviate fears many people had surrounding like taking such a strong drug, because like Oxycontin is a very strong drug, and it was used to like dispel worry. And the tragedy here is that not only did this grandma get addicted to this medication, but 2 other participants in the like video testimonials, there were like 6, 2 of them died. And the rest were, for the most part, were linked and proven to have been addicted to the medication until they eventually were able to get off of it or didn't and died. So the only thing that saved this grandma in this video was losing her health insurance so that she could not get any more Oxycontin, even if she wanted to, because she had lost her job. There is a cycle of damage here that is multifaceted. All of our basic human needs have a cost. So we need money to live. We need a job to get money. We need to maintain a job. In order to maintain a job, we need to be physically and mentally capable of work. If we are ill or in pain, we lose work or could lose our jobs because we're missing hours because we have to stay home or call out because we're in pain. If we lose our jobs, we lose our ability to care for ourselves through housing, food, and medical insurance. There is no infrastructure to receive the people who end up in that category who need help. Because to be disabled is a death sentence. This disability is widely underfunded. I know 2 people personally who cannot qualify for it because it's so difficult to qualify for it. They treat you like you're a liar the entire time. And when you actually need it, there's no infrastructure in place that actually supports people who are disabled. And they get so little money actually from the government that it's not sustainable to live off of anyway.
Yeah, and any of the care that they get can be really dehumanizing and like takes away any autonomy in their lives as well. Like it's like, okay, either like you fully can take care of yourself and you do this, or you need our help and that means you can't do anything yourself.
Yeah. So many disabled people are forced to work without support because they cannot qualify for disability as well, and at the threat of homelessness and death. So now that we know that homelessness is considered a crime to which it will be jailed for and forced to do labor for free, whether or not you can or not, knowing all that and then being told there's a medication that will make it so that you no longer hear the signals from your body that prevent you from working. Literally any human could become addicted to that because it's literally the only thing. It's a Band-Aid that allows you to continue to participate in the system. Because
if you're not competing in the system, then you're worthless.
And you're dead, literally. So there are so many factors that made this drug so impactful in that it was given too widely. And then like it's a Band-Aid for all these problems. Like there are lots of people getting injured on the job, hurt on the job, hurt in general, and then they're not supported. Their only route is to take this medication that will eventually lead to being addicted. It's a whole thing. So it's teaching you to ignore the signals from your body. And because in the system is literally life-saving until it's not. So you essentially are solving pain. You're not solving the problem that's causing the pain. You're giving it a Band-Aid. So to capitalism, this is the perfect solution because it requires the government to spend the least amount of money. It is the most efficient way for them to spend money is to get population as addicted to things that will make them literally have to work more and have no connection to their bodies in order to work more until like they ultimately cannot anymore. And at that point, good, they'll die. That's what they think. Ultimately.
That's why it's like, I stand by this. I think Brave New Worlds really is a spot on dystopia.
Yeah. So ultimately, it is super intentional and manipulative of these companies. That's why I say it's like a multifaceted thing. Like these people at the top, this company, the Sackler family, caused the start, They made this medicine, they marketed it so heavily. They blatantly lied to people saying it wasn't addictive when it was. They had evidence that it was. But in addition to that, the system of the world, we had just seen Reaganomics like really start to like hit, and people were really facing economic hardship. And like there was so much happening to devalue the infrastructure that received people who needed help during that time right before this epidemic of drugs, that it like literally compounded together into this like perfect storm. In addition, videos marketing the drug in the 90s said that less than 1% of patients became addicted to opioids, which we now know is a lie, but which at the time was misleading because the company was paying doctors to speak on what addiction was. Similar to what we see in the House of Usher, the company had doctors on their payroll tasked with pushing this medication and benefiting the company. They had this doctor named Alan Spanos coined a new phrase called pseudo-addiction. So I said they had marketing dollars. You know what I mean? Like they had a PR campaign around pushing this drug and not taking accountability for it. Very much like Camille Usher did. There's a lot of connection there. So he coined a phrase called pseudo addiction and said that it's when someone wants pain medication, not because they're addicted to it, because they need relief. And they're not addicted to drugs, but they are addicted to relief, which is as absurd as it sounds, because that's literally what addiction is. Like the idea being that they're not addicted, even though they're acting addicted, and actually are just doing it because they need more oxy. The solution to the problem is more drugs. And that's not addiction. That's how we're helping them, you know, because these people just think they're addicted.
They just want to feel good.
Yeah. And it also fails to acknowledge that all drug use is in response to a need of some kind, whether it is to address pain or trauma or chemical imbalances. Like people don't just take drugs for no reason. Like it's because something's happening systemically and in their lives that makes that seem like a better option, or the only option in this case, because they were literally giving it to people who like fell and got a scratch on their leg, and they're like, well, you know, you could use some pain medication. Actually, can I get you some oxy? And they would give them oxy for like small injuries, and they were marketing it as like, you hurt your knee? Yeah, give them some oxy. You banged your wrist? Get them some oxy. Like it was really like considered like
you're a little
Tylenol.
sad? Get them some oxy.
Yeah, it was literally like they were pitching it as if it was like Tylenol. You know what I mean? So people use drugs and become addicted to drugs for a reason. And the issue with this is that it is, as I said a few times now, is the reason that this works so well is because of everything that was happening societally. So an additional flaw with the system is that these doctors were prescribing this medication, and that is like a flaw within the medical industry as a whole. Doctors do not have the bandwidth to spend the amount of time that they actually need to spend with patients to accurately and thoughtfully provide care. Dr. House is a lie. There are not doctors who have like a team of other like help, like sitting in a patient for like hours, really working with individual patients and like helping them with a lot of time. The amount of times I've spent at a doctor, I spent more time waiting for a doctor than I actually am in and seeing a doctor. And that's because they don't have enough bandwidth. There's not enough doctors. And then also like they are basically shoved from person to person, so they cannot adequately and like thoughtfully provide care. And insurance companies make life-saving medications so expensive that patients can't afford them. And doctors are discouraged by insurance companies from giving diagnoses because then they have to pay for treatment. So you have like all these things happening, and it's all comes down to like individual decisions too. Like there's some doctors who would be like, no, I won't do that. But there are also lots of doctors like, I'm going to get a payback from Purdue, the Oxy company, for doing this. And, you know, then I can send my kid to college. And they made the choice to do that.
So I'm going to pay that college to send them to it anyway. So.
Yeah. Yep. So essentially it's there's so many things at play. So it's kind of like that speech that Usher was making in the show where he's talking about like, you know, you would think that I couldn't get these ancient Egyptian relics, but if I buy the company that oversees the protection of Egyptian relics, and then I also buy the museum and I buy like this, that, and everything has a price. And that's literally what this is. If you're buying hospitals and like the FDA, like, you know, like the companies that evaluate and protect these things, which I'll get into later, because there's literally companies whose job it was to like report if they were giving out too many addictive substances, and they failed expeditiously, likely because the illusion of choice. These companies own all these other companies. It's like a whole thing. So ultimately, I'm sorry, I'm getting like all over the place, but in the year 2000 alone, doctors had prescribed Oxycontin in almost 6 million patients as a quick fix for any and all pain they had mentioned. By 2007, that's just in 1 year. By 2007, after people clearly caught on to what was happening, as millions of people were now addicted to Oxycontin and drugs like it, functioning as a gateway to other drugs, they were sued for $634 million for blatantly lying to the American public about its addictiveness. Other companies like Cephalon paid an additional $444 million for pushing similar drugs. Another company called Insys was investigated for pushing a drug that contained fentanyl, which is now the big issue right now, which was originally only approved to support patients fighting cancer because it's 100 times more strong than morphine. And they did this by lying to insurance companies, saying patients had cancer that didn't have cancer so that the drug would be approved for non-cancer patients. So it's like in the show where they would have people sign the forms that didn't actually sign the forms. It's kind of like that. They did this with semantics. So ironically, one of the people I'm going to talk about later has a PhD in linguistics, which I think really plays a part in this moment because these people, the Insys company, was able to get away with this for so long because they wouldn't affirmatively answer the questions from the insurance providers and would go off someone's like instinctive response to be like, means yes. So they would ask like, does this patient have cancer? And they would say, But because they didn't blatantly say yes or no.
That's so gross.
They were semantically, legally allowed to say that they didn't consent or say that they did.
That's so gross.
Isn't it? And she has a PhD.
How do you feel good doing that? How do you feel good doing that?
Yeah.
How do you feel like you're like, how do you leave the room and go, I'm the good person in that?
That's crazy. Honestly, I assume
you don't even think about it.
It's not even that. I think it's more like, how you have the companies, like one person makes the screws and the other person makes the steel. And then you have everyone so separated out that they don't even realize what they're doing. Yeah. I think it's probably more that, unless you're at the top making those decisions, which there are thousands, almost millions of emails and letters and whatever. Like they have all this stuff in writing, but I'll get into why we don't have public access to that. So similarly, when these lawsuits went through, the records would be sealed from the public and companies like Purdue would claim no wrongdoing as a condition of the payout. So they'd be like, I will give you this money, but that means you cannot say that I did anything wrong. And all the evidence that you collected in this case has to be sealed, burned, thrown out, that you can never be brought up again or used against me.
Like a double jeopardy.
Yeah. The infrastructure to replace opioids in the YouTube series, well, it was on TV at one point, but the YouTube series on opioids, he basically goes on to talk about like how there's no infrastructure to replace what opioids created. So like they're giving millions of dollars, but like the solution to this and like the healing from this is so expensive and it requires so many different industries to be impacted and so many different like services to be supported. Like it requires like the entire, like every billionaire that exists to give their money so that we can solve all these societal problems. And that's not what's going to happen. So like $444 million is nothing in the grand scheme of what problem they've created. There's also, they were talking about like there's issues where there's not alternative options for pain really available. Many of them are not covered by insurance. And in specifically like rural areas, they don't have facilities for these kinds of care. So like physical therapies and other treatments. And if they do, as I said, they're not covered by insurance, or they're like the copays are so expensive that you're not able to qualify for anything else other than the drugs that they're offering. Disgustingly, these companies are also marketing additional drugs to address side effects of the opioids, like constipation. There are like videos of that where like it was a Super Bowl ad.
Yeah. They're like, let's alleviate the issues that you have from our drug with a new our drug.
Yeah. So they're profiting off of additional drugs that they're creating to address the concerns of the drug that's already actively harming people. It's really like, it feels like we're watching a show, but it's reality. So the three companies that also helped get these drugs people facing, and essentially were like, that's what I was talking about with like the museums, where like you buy the places that would stop you from doing the thing. There are three companies that were in charge of monitoring these drugs and like making sure that they report to the FDA and the government that like you're getting high orders of these addictive substances, but actively failed to do so. And they are Cardinal Health, McKesson, and AmerisourceBergen. So when called out on this, these three companies basically paid hush money of $30 million without claiming wrongdoing again. And without consequences, the company did even worse at reporting like any increase in orders, to the point where like there's like this small town that it was called Kermit, and they had 400 residents. This is what John was talking about in the video. It's like there's 400 residents, and they were giving them an absurd amount of drugs, like to this one pharmacy that only had 400 residents in that town. They were giving them like all of the oxy in the world, like millions of oxy, and for these 400 people. In like 1 year, this person ordered, I think it was like 6 million.
That's crazy.
And like no one said anything. Like these companies that are supposed to monitor that and like be like, hey, actually we noticed like this pharmacy's getting like way too much. What are we doing here? They don't report it. Why? I don't have those answers, because the records that probably prove it are sealed and burned or whatever. So honestly, when I'm like thinking back to that one episode we did, They Clone Tyrone, I'm like, where did they learn how to do this? The CIA or whatever. It's fine. It's not. But essentially, the FDA was like, and the government were like, what are you doing? You're supposed to be monitoring this. And they're like, shh, it's fine. Here's $30 million. That's enough, right? And then without companies, they did even worse. And in 2017, they paid an additional $150 million, being like, you know what? Actually, you know, you're right. We thought we handled it. We didn't. Here's some more money. We didn't do anything wrong, though. You know, and it's still nothing in comparison to the revenue for 1 year. I think he went on to say that it was 1/1000th of their total revenue for the year was $150 million. So just like the Ushers, there was always a price to be paid to avoid accountability. There was always a way out. And that's what I'm going to talk about, the Sackler family, because like they're the same people. That's the people who own Purdue, and that's the company that like birthed the opioid crisis, and they're the same. They're the same family. I would not be shocked if the actors who played the Usher family watched the interviews and deposition and like those family members as like practice for their roles. So similarly to the Ushers, they would put their names on things like museums or universities or like royal gardens and stuff like that, but they would never put their name on the company. So they would actively hide that like they worked at Purdue. They named it Purdue, specifically not like Sackler Pharmaceuticals or whatever, because like they didn't want their name associated with the company because they knew what they were doing. So the Sackler family was deeply involved in the opioid crisis, specifically Richard Sackler being president of the Purdue company from 1999 to 2003. And he had served on the board with 7 other family members. This family was like deeply involved in this company. And lawsuits indicated that Richard Sackler went with, as I said, to sales reps, to doctor's office pushing the drug. And when asked about the deaths as a result of the drug, he said, it could have been worse. Seemingly intentionally, almost like they have a Camille Usher on their team. This man has been pretty scrubbed from the internet. He has not done any visual interviews. They only recently released his deposition when he was sued, when the company was sued, because it's not him that's sued, it's the company. So he didn't want to release the videos, and there's like one picture of his face that exists on the entire internet. They really are good at like PR and like hiding themselves from blame. So Sackler wrote that the blame was not on his company, but on the people the addicted to the medicine. And a lot of their marketing and PR was oriented around that. Is that it's like the people's problem. He's Madeline. You know what I mean? It's like they shouldn't be addicted to the drugs. Like, what do you mean?
They want it. We're just giving them what they want.
Yeah. So it's like if anyone's like, oh, Madeline Usher, you know, you're saying some smart stuff, you must really love the Sackler family specifically.
They do. People do.
Yeah. But additionally concerning is every time they paid settlements for lawsuits to absolve themselves of their crimes, they did so under conditions that all evidence would be sealed and unavailable to the public, which would have flied pretty much in pre-internet times, but because of the internet and the way information spreads, we actually were able to get this information. Like, there was an entire show about it. And that, like, you know, like, people were talking about it way more than they had before the internet. And the information about it was way harder to control because of how uncontrollable TikTok and things like the internet are. So we essentially see that the documents from these earlier trials, like in the 90s, were destroyed. So sometimes these documents were burned, and the Sackler family has also gone very out of the way to make sure videos and pictures of them would not be released. So on the Last Week Tonight show, they had actors read the statements he made in court, which the deposition has like later been released. But it was essentially like they would have news reporters read his words, and it just wouldn't hit the same because it's like they're quoting someone. They're not actually seeing this gross old man say awful things.
Yeah.
So basically, Last Week Tonight hired actors to say literally his court transcripts, like his responses to the lawyers. And you can watch that on the sacklergallery.com, which they made for the show. But in recent years, the deposition video has been released, so you can watch the Sackler man, Richard Sackler, on the stand saying he doesn't know about 100 times to the crimes of the company, and like acting just like very unremorseful. I actually see the eldest Usher as similar to Richard Sackler, like in their demeanor. It's like just very much like he is being fed lines by Arthur Prim and doesn't know anything, is claiming ignorance, and like is because of that
deny.
Yeah, exactly. So another Sackler heir named David Sackler would be similar to Camille Usher in that he led PR and marketing to save the Sackler name. So they basically led all the smear campaigns against other addicts, as well as like painting them as the victim in the situation. So very much like Camille, like, we have to humanize ourselves. We have to capitalize on these deaths. We really have to control the narrative. Sympathy is the best thing we could get from the public right now. And that's very much like David Sackler, who basically published articles claiming that his children were getting bullied because people were telling their children that the family's work was killing people.
No, not them getting the truth.
And he went on to create a website called judgeforyourself.info that is dedicated entirely to proving the Sackler's innocence. This website was pushed by David Sackler's wife, Joss Sackler, the goal being to argue for them being victims in the situation. We're just people, you know.
We're just very rich, monstrous people.
Yeah, and it's like, they are people, yeah, but they're also people who actively made bad choices to harm other people. Like, just like Roderick, he's technically a person, but he's out there making choices that will result in millions of bodies falling from the sky like rain.
And he didn't care, right? Like, he just cared that there was consequences and that they finally caught up to him.
And it's like, he just didn't love his kids enough till he had one grandbaby that reminded him of his dead wife. Like,
yeah, you didn't love her then.
Yeah.
When she's like telling him like how he corrupted their children, like when she's a ghost. It's just like I felt so hard for her.
Yeah. And then like the sister is like, it's just an act. I always thought it's just an act. Like, this is how you get your one up on people, but you're really like this. You're actually good. Ew. That's so much worse. And it's like, actually, babe, Madeline, you're the problem, actually. It's actually really sad how broken you are and that you don't see that at all. Yeah. So is there good news? ? In an article titled Purdue Pharma Family Protected from Lawsuits in Exchange for Addiction Treatment Funding, they confirmed that a court ruled that the owners of Purdue Pharma, the Sackler family, will be protected from civil lawsuits linked to the opioid crisis in exchange for $6 billion settlement. $6 billion is definitely more than they had previously given, sure. But if we're really looking at how much wealth the Sackler family has, they had an $11 billion fortune. 11 minus 6. I'm not great at math.
And billion is still a lot. Like billion, like people need to remember that. Like people think a billion is like a billion. It's not. Billion's a disgusting amount of money that no small group of people should have. No one should be able to say we have $1 billion unless it's all of humanity.
And they still have 5 left.
Yes.
So additionally, the Sackler family did not receive any felony convictions. Only the company of Purdue did, which claimed a bankruptcy. And so it's a company that can't serve jail time. So the Sackler family will not receive any felony convictions themselves or serve any jail time. Additionally, they still have $5 million left to do with whatever the heck they're going to do. And more enraging is there will be no personal responsibility for the Sackler family because they signed this deal that basically says, like, in the future, no matter what happens, we can't be sued again.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say the Sackler family, I do not believe is in charge of the fentanyl crisis. That's an entire different company. I believe that's INSYS that started that. That's an entire different situation taking place. Similar motivation. But I don't have like all the details on that. I think we should all, after this episode, maybe go read about that because that's what's happening right now. Mm-hmm. The oxycodone started it. They monopolized on that. Rolling rock, you know what I mean? They're like, oh, we saw how you did it. Let's do that too. But more enraging is, as I said, there's no personal responsibility to the Sackler family. But in the PBS interview, they continue that in total, drug manufacturers, pharmacies, and distributors have pledged around $54 billion to state, local, and tribal governments for their respective role in the opioid epidemic. And then there, you talk about the government that want to start addiction treatment programs or recovery housing. But at the same time, the way this money is moving forward and actually getting out to people is by protecting the Sackler family from any personal responsibility. The issue being that it is not guaranteed that the government parties will use this money in how it's intended as well, and that there's no consequence for these people that like murdered millions of people, either now or stole their futures, like went through time, as Flanagan said, and stole their futures, what they could have been. So they continue, and this is William Brigham from the PBS interview, and they said, this is kind of like what the concern was back in the 90s when the big tobacco settlements happened too, that we don't know. We think that the money is going to the tobacco prevention and smoking cessation, but not always. And Anari Patani continued, like, yes, exactly. The most of that money didn't go to tobacco or anti-smoking programs at all. In fact, the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, which tracks it, says about 3% of the annual payout went to that. 3%? Yes, the rest of it has gone to everything you can imagine, like filling state budget gaps, transportation, paving roads, and filling potholes. In North Carolina and South Carolina, they actually used it to subsidize tobacco farmers. The one difference I will mention, though, is that tobacco settlement didn't have any requirements for the money to be spent on it. So sort of assume that because the money was coming because of the public health crisis caused by cigarettes, that it would be used for that. But it wasn't actually a legal requirement. In the opioid settlements, it does have that requirement that 85% of the money be spent on opioid remediation. And I think that there's a lot of questions about how that will be enforced, and that if that will really come true. But that clause was in there because people did not want to see it repeat. And I will say that's like really important because it's hard to have faith that they're going to do what they're going to do correctly because of what we've already witnessed happen and because of the idea that like all these companies are owned by the same person. And if we like use what we saw from the 3 companies that were tasked by the FDA, Cardinal Health, McKesson, and AmerisourceBergen, in order to like monitor what was happening. Like people are going to do stuff till they get caught. That's what rich people have taught me. Is that people are going to do stuff till they get caught, and if they're not caught, there's not going to be consequences. And if you're telling me that this family, this company, like they went bankrupt, sure, but these people still have $5 billion. That there's literally no real consequence for this entire family that is responsible for all these people dying. That there's not going to be another family that's like, oh, well, they didn't get consequences. We could do the same thing. We can make a bunch
and we can learn from their mistakes so we don't owe anyone $6 billion.
Yes. And that's the really pessimistic outlook. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it's also like thinking of the military budget and how they spend billions on pain creams for compounding pharmacy. That's another Last Week Tonight episode that I watched. They were proven to not work, and on their budgets, they haven't been audited because there are billions of dollars unaccounted for.
Yes.
Like, we know that people will people in power, unfortunately, will manipulate funding and wealth and power in order to benefit themselves without any accountability, because there aren't Vernas. We need to be Verna. And if we're not being Verna, or we're not being Lenore, for example, or we're not being the wife who recovers and makes the nonprofit that helps all those people and like actually like is on the ground helping people, like there's not going to be help. You know what I mean? So with policies like record sealing and not releasing information to these public, these situations are absolutely repeatable unless individuals stand up as a group together and say no. These things happen because of characters like the Usher family and like the real Sackler family, who did things for their own benefit without thinking about the rest of the world, thinking the rest of the world, the next generation will have to deal with this, not me. In an individualistic nation where there's no collective, there's such division, it's hard to expect people to stand up for what is right in the way that we need. But I will say that we are seeing changes thankful to things like social media and the internet. Apps like TikTok that share information to the public that otherwise would have been successfully swept under the rug. That's why things like TikTok ban are so dangerous, because they recognize that we see so much more than we used to, and that they cannot oppress us in the same ways that they used to before, because we are talking to each other. We are sharing the information at a rate that cannot be controlled. And that scares the rich so much that they want to take it away. This is also just my theory. The last thing I'll say about the lawsuit as a whole is I think the timing is important. This happened post 2020. And I don't have any proof of this. This is my theory. But because the government can only be supporting of a subservient workforce if they have one. And 2020 onward, we lost millions of people to the pandemic, and capitalism lost millions of workers. We also saw the rise of TikTok and people actually having the time to pay attention to what was happening around them. I think these two things are why they got caught. The government can only look away from an addictive substance as long as they are able to control it for their benefit. And once they lost millions of the workforce of the pandemic, they had to care more about those things that impacted their ability to work. The introduction of fentanyl is important here as well. Like an even stronger alternative to oxycodone was spreading like wildfire and killing and addicting even faster. And our younger generations aren't having kids at the rate that they want, all of which combines together into this different kind of perfect storm where they need to give the illusion of punishment and hope that this appeases people. And also, they want us to be mad about so many things that we can't organize ourselves. Because like they're literally making all of the things, they're making the situation worse. Yeah. Ultimately.
And distracting us.
Trying to be like, aliens, look over here.
And like, they're also really good at like reframing the narrative so that it looks like they're not impeding on our civil rights. Like all the time. Just like, or just like our right to exist. They spin it so that it reflects back on us as being the problem, or that they're somehow helping, that they're the heroes. That's just, to encourage people to sacrifice or to give up certain freedoms and rights for protection or the illusion of protection. Yeah. Just like classic MO.
And what they're seeing is like with stuff like TikTok, like that it's not working as well as it used to. Like people are catching on and realizing like, oh, hey, we're really being manipulated here. Like this isn't actually what they've been saying it's been this whole time. And it's a lot harder for them to sweep it over or sweep it under the rug in the same way. Because there's like so many content creators who are like, I see what you're trying to do, but no, like that's not what this is. This isn't what's happening. Like you're trying to spin the issue so that you look good, and it's not going to work. because we have people paying attention to what you're doing, and we're going to talk about it right here. And that's why they want to get rid of it. And if they do, like, we're going to see more Sackler families. We're going to see more Ushers, and it should make everyone really scared and mad.
You know, like they say, the revolution will not be televised, but it will be on TikTok.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, that's scary. And I work in public media, you know, the people's voice is my whole thing, and it is really strong. It's just not, like, it's all about amplifying those voices and getting them out there, sharing that information, and just remembering that we are stronger together, and that we do have the people power, that we do have that option. It's not impossible. Right? It just
they want
looks
us to
different.
think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. They want to distract us, and they want to tell us it's us, that we're doing it. That's your fault, that the environment and that this planet is crying.
No, it's the companies.
It isn't.
It's the billionaires' fault, because they're the ones doing the most damage. We could recycle all we want, and they still dump it in the ocean. We don't do that. They do.
They still send their labor somewhere else where they can't be regulated.
Yep.
And then they say it's our fault that we don't have jobs.
We don't want to work anymore, Gabe. What do you mean?
Yeah, nobody wants to work anymore.
No one ever wanted to work. Fun fact.
Yeah, fun fact. Work sucks.
Yeah.
So, thank you, Kat.
I'll try to like put some resources in there, because like I don't want it to land on such a depressing note. Though the uplifting note is that like we are making progress. Like the boycotts are working. People are like realizing people have power. So keep doing that, and I'll see if I can find some like resources on like what the heck we could be doing to share retroactively. Yeah,
we will share. It'll be in show notes and in the blog. Yeah, and that, like, you know, that again, it's a part of why I'm so appreciative of having done this Flanagan series, because like at first it was like, okay, it's because I had fun watching these shows, and there was, you know, again, the classic horror nerd in me was geeking out about the different shows and, you know, connecting to. And I think in our rewatch of a lot of the content, I was like, wow, there's this whole other conversation that keeps happening, or like he's weaving in this entertainment and like this outcry, and also just like having conversations about what it means to be a human, to be a person, and to live like in all the complexity that is. And I think he's done a really beautiful job in all the ways that he has covered these topics, and in the different ways that he has aesthetically. They're really beautiful and engaging. He really encompasses like the horror genre in what we're often trying to like tell people about it, because, you know, people just think like slasher, and this kind of feels like a slasher because we're killing people off every episode, you know, like the numbers are dwindling, and it is a Shakespearean tragedy. Everyone's dead, you know. And I think that's really fun, but then it's like you're sitting there, especially this one, I feel like he really was like, I'm not even pretending. Like, it was so, like, all of it was so obvious. And I can see how some people might be like, not like it because it was so obvious. But I appreciate it, because I think some people need that. Not all of us are as cognizant of these issues. And it sometimes just take like a big thing, like seeing those bodies fall and pile up, to go, oh yeah, right. Yeah. That's happening. And also to like, maybe, you know, it has you think or rethink how you feel about people that you encounter who are addicted and have that, you know, challenge of their lives. Like, consider how they got here and all of the obstacles in their way towards getting better. You know, it's just like humanizing an issue that, like, I think once you see how the narrative has been weaponized against them to make them the bad guy when they're actively suffering, whatever the issue is, like whether that's, you know, people who are addicted, people who are unhoused, people who look different, poor people, like all of the others that exist, the outliers, the real like victims, or people who are victims of circumstance, are portrayed as like, you did this to yourself, look at you.
And that's like not, it's not the case. It's a coping mechanism for a very unfair society. Like therapy, it's hard to be a therapist because literally a lot of the things people are anxious about are valid. You can't be like, that's irrational that you don't want to, you're scared you might lose your job and your housing, because it's a very real threat that everyone has all the time. So like, it's frustrating because, yeah, as you said, like they portray them as if they're these monsters or that they did it to themselves. And literally anyone could be in their position at any point. It's literally just like 3 bad things happening at the same time that could put you in that those shoes.
It's like one missed paycheck.
Yeah.
You know, could really just could unhouse you. Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah. So, yeah. So that's our Flanagan episode, our series. I think we covered a lot, just like he covered a lot. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned some things. I hope you enjoy his work as well. Give him some credit. And maybe just give credit to the horror genre for doing that. Because, like, again, he's all the things that he's working on, like, are built upon, like, this foundation that was already there from people who've been saying similar issues, right? Like, Poe talking about the elite partying it up during a literal plague in 1839 or whatever.
And they're partying it up.
Happened in 2020. Like, that to me is like, it's insane. You know, it's sick. What is it? Sick. When it's a circle. Cyclical. Thank you. It was like circular. Yeah. I was like, that's not it. Cyclical. Yeah. So, yeah. I think I was abstained from my top. I will say I do think it's hard. I think because they all have different things that I really appreciate from them. So it's like I don't really have, like, I'd have to make like a whole like point system.
To judge.
I just think they all serve different purposes, and so they're all brilliant to serve the purpose that they set out to do.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, everyone, I don't have an answer. I will say, top, like, up there, really, Midnight Mass blew me away. And Hill House still really has some heartbreaking stuff. I think it's similar to you, Kat, where it's like Hill House and Usher are kind of tied.
Yeah, they were tied for me.
Yeah.
Midnight Mouse is at the top.
Yeah.
And then Bly was at the bottom. I don't know how to classify the other one because I didn't finish it, so I would want to rewatch it from start to finish and then give it a proper slotting. But I remember it being good. It was just like, it was kids like going through really hard things instead of adults going through really hard things. So it was a different framing. Yeah.
And a lot of characters from there are in Usher. So, like Perry, the wife, what was her name?
Oh, yeah, she is in it.
Yeah, and then obviously one of the assistants of Camille, like, they out there. He be keeping people. So, shout out Flanagan. We'll be starting a new series soon. Ghouls are going bi-weekly after this. We're going to try to, give ourselves more time to really dive into issues so that, like, you can have more episodes like this where we can dive in and unpack content and feel good about what we're putting out there and researching and helping
with. It gives us more intentionality because it's like hard to do this week to week where you have to read so many things. And it's like, even this episode, I wish we had more time. So it'll be really helpful in making sure that, like, we cover things as thoughtfully as possible because we won't be rushing.
Yeah, like, there's like a whole conversation that I was like, we could have had so many different conversations about, like, animal testing on, like, the whole Telltale Heart episode and the rush and the manipulation of the people who are a part of that. Like, every little thing, or even just like Frederick and his treatment of his wife. Like, there's so many levels of, like, every episode was kind of touching on a different issue. We just don't got the time. I was like, we could have went episode by episode.
Yeah.
We could have been like, let's teach you.
I could have said even more, ultimately. I feel like I said a lot, so there's a lot we could have covered.
Which is a good thing. It's a good sign. But hope you enjoyed it. This is a long one, but well worth it, I think. I really appreciated what you brought, Kat.
Me too.
And don't get married.
delete your kids, or your kids will be sacrificed by your choices.
Mm-hmm. I can't get over the fact that he made that deal and he had 2 alive children.
Yeah.
Like, even if you don't think it's real, you just don't, like, manifestation is real. You do not say those words. You don't put that out in the world. Like, that already was like, he is villain. He's evil. Yeah. I was like, ain't no real human with a capacity for care for their family could do that.
Yeah.
You couldn't say that stuff. You could not be.
It's because the whole thing was that she was saying, like, isn't it better? It's like kind of rationalizing the whole Hill House thing where it's like, isn't it better for them to have a few years of really good time than a lifetime of suffering? And it's like, no. The answer is no. You might have thought you knew it wasn't the right choice, and you may have convinced yourself in order to, like, rationalize it that it was the right thing to do, but it was not. And that's what people do.
They robbed them. They robbed those people of their lives.
You reached through time.
And stole who they could have been. Truly did. Yeah. Okay, it does too. Always. You be saying stuff. I'm like, I can't breathe.
Yeah.
Well, bye.
Bye.
Rate us on the internet, please. Send us a review.
Positively, please.
Yes, a positive review. Thank you.